to sort of dive into the beginning of your musical journey. How did you get involved with music, and what made you want to pursue media composition in specific?
It starts from my childhood. I've been singing since I was a kid, and I grew up listening to a lot of Indian music. Actually, my parents brought with them from India to the U.S. when they first emigrated here in the late '70s. So I grew up listening to a lot of what they grew up listening to, and so I developed this love for old Hindi music, and I sang it all throughout my childhood. And after high school and college, I started a band called Gold Spot, and made records and toured around the world, and had an incredible experience writing music. And that's kind of where I learned to really write songs. It was in my band. I was a songwriter, and I played like a lot of the instruments as well, and had wonderful collaborations with other musicians along the way as well. And then one day, I think maybe in 2000, what is it, 14? Not 14. Maybe it was 14. Yeah, maybe around 14. Dan Fogelman, who created This Is Us, he had another show at the time called The Neighbors, and he asked me to come on board and score second season of The Neighbors, and I took the gig. And then that kind of started everything for me.
Yeah. So This Is Us is a show with so many different layers. There's so many different characters, and it's expertly crafted by Dan Fogelman. Can you talk just a little bit about how you began on the series? Did you set yourself a path by writing suites? How did you sort of establish a lot of the sonic ideas in terms of the guitar and everything like that?
Well, on This Is Us, I came up with the sound of the score from reading the script. Dan sent me the pilot script before the pilot was picked up to series. They had just shot the first episode, and they were starting to edit the episode. And he sent me the script, and I think the show was called The 36 or something at the time, because they're all 36 years old. It had a different name. And he said, read it and see what it inspires. And the Dan's writing is beautiful. It's organic. It's emotional. It's you get chills just reading some of his scripts sometimes. And so I found that I also knew that they were going to use a Sufjan Stevens song in the pilot. And so I think knowing that having that information of what song they were thinking, one of the songs they were thinking that was going to be in the pilot, really informed what I was going to do with the score, because I like the songs and the score kind of living in the same world. And they don't always have to be that way, but it's nice when they do, so there's some cohesive thread. And so I picked up my guitar, and I was just noodling along as I was reading the script. I was I just had it in my lap the whole time. And I wrote the 6.5-minute piece of score and sent it to Dan. And the score had acoustic guitars. It had a little bit of had a little synth in it, but it was very subtle, more in that kind of Brian Eno-ish kind of way of using synth. It had, I don't know if it may have had some cello, but it was very, very simple and evocative at the same time, and I sent it to Dan, and he flipped, and he's like, yep, that's the sound of the show. And I got the gig.
Yeah, absolutely, because it is like a score that's primarily centered around the guitar, but there's so many different elements that are sort of intertwined into it. But overall, it seems very intimate and close, and very much sort of simulating what the story is in a way. What do you think it is between the relationship of music and visuals, or the story, that creates the impact or the magic that it does with the audience?
Well, I think the beauty of music for visual media is that it is a highly collaborative thing. It's like multiple pieces of this jigsaw puzzle come together. And in once in a blue moon, like a masterpiece is created. And I think This Is Us is one of those masterpieces. It's one of those rare shows and rare, pieces of visual media, rare piece of content that hits on all cylinders. The writing is there, the direction is there, the performances from the actors are there. I think the music is there, the editing is there. All of it is just right, And so it's the magic of that collaboration. I think it's just the right people collaborating at the right time to make it happen, and and allowing for every little piece of that puzzle to have its own space too. You know, the score for the show could have easily been this orchestral, overwrought, piece of score, and it would have changed the tone of the show entirely. It could have made the show not as cool or interesting, and so for me, I wanted the score to feel like it was supporting what was there, living under the skin a little bit, so you feel it, and I wanted it to feel nostalgic, and I wanted it to feel warm, just without ever being cheesy, you know? And so there was this, and I think keeping it rooted in something organic. I mean, the instrumentation I'm using is timeless, and so it doesn't have a timestamp on it. I'm using sounds that only I can create, you know? I think, that's the beauty of kind of what we all try to achieve in art is we try to make something that's original and uniquely yours, you know, I think there are tons of other great composers who could have done a wonderful job on this show, and they would have done their own different thing, but I don't think anybody would have done what I did specifically based on what I'm using, how I'm using it. There's a soul in it, there's a feel in it that's very special to me, that feels like my voice is in the score a little bit too. So I think, though, what makes it work, again, is that collaboration. You know, you need it. You need everything to hit at the same time. The score would not be the same if the actors were not as great as they are, you know?
Yeah. So one of the most important parts of a score, whether it's for a movie or whether it's for a game or whether it's for a TV show, is, of course, the spotting. When the music comes in, when it sort of exits, when there isn't music is almost just as important as when there is music, in a way, the balance between the two. So can you talk about how you sort of establish where you want the music to be in a certain episode?
Well, Dan trusts his team implicitly, and that's kind of why I think everyone is shining on this show, is because of that trust. And Dan and I rarely will spot together on the show. I think I just I know him well enough. I know what his instincts are in particular situations, and he knows what mine are as well. And so it's really about that relationship between me and the editors at the end of the day, because the editors and I are seeing everything before really everyone else is, and we're seeing kind of early cuts and seeing how everything is fitting, and then editors and I are talking about where to spot. There's obvious places where music needs to be, and I like to bring score in when I feel like it's earned, if that makes any sense. So there's a lot of network television where score will, like, you'll hear wall-to-wall score, and it ends up becoming wallpaper, and there's nothing more painful for me to listen to and watch than that. And then there's also other network television, not network, but just television generally, where you find that music is trying to save a scene where the performance isn't there. So the music is trying to make you feel something that the scene's not already trying to give you or not giving you. And I think that's where the show can also fail. So for us, I feel like the performances are there. So I have to find the right moments. And so because the performances are so strong, I like bringing in some of the emotional score that's coming in as people have earned the right to get it. You know, you'll notice that a lot of times it's there's sometimes where I'm waiting until, like, a monologue might almost be done until the score comes in, where it, like, plays to the aftermath of that monologue. It plays to, like, the reflection. You know, the monologue happens and the music is almost like the reflective element that comes in that makes you feel like the kind of the aftermath of what was just said. I love when I get to do that. You know, there's oftentimes too when I'm scoring a scene that's got no dialogue at all, and it's just picture, and this dialogue track is just silent. And so in those cases, the music needs to actually tell the story. There's a bunch of shows where, like, you can tell, like, the people putting in music just to try to make the audience cry, and which is honestly one of the most, I find it so remedial, you know, when I hear it, and it's so obvious, and it's like it's trying too hard, it's schmaltzy, and you know, and oftentimes people are doing that because they don't have the confidence in the material and they don't realize it, and they're so used to also hearing, you know, the typical network television note from a studio executive is, wait, we can't have silence there. Or this is a comedic scene. Where's the comedy music? Where's the bouncy donk 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 donk? Where's that music? And this is an emotional scene. Where's the music? So I think people are so used to hearing something, but when you actually take a step back and you look at some of the pictures of the performances, and there's an important thing that I think people miss sometimes, especially in network television. And this is where cable and streaming is really great, and that's why This Is Us succeeds, because we are kind of closer to I feel like we're as streaming or a cable show, but on network television is what it took. I just happen to be on NBC, and it's that we respect the audience. I think that's what it is too. It's knowing that the audience knows when to feel something. The audience can be emotional on their own. The audience knows when they're supposed to laugh, and it's respecting them a little bit. And I think it's a weird thing. It's like I feel like when you have a comedy scene. And I don't score the comedy on This Is Us. If you notice, there's never been a single comedy cue in the show for 3 seasons. I vehemently avoid it. I never want to put it in. And it's because I feel like an audience member the scene is so funny, they should laugh on their own. They don't need the music.
So I'm curious about how your template has evolved. Have you kept a lot of the sounds that you use from certain episodes and sort of built it up to the point at where it is now? Can you discuss your sort of process with the template?
Yeah, I think the template in season 1 was a lot simpler. It was probably the simplest form of the score, and probably the simplest form it'll ever be again. I don't think it'll ever be that simple again. Season 1 was literally sometimes just me plucking my acoustic guitar and humming along. It was almost like I was just kind of this invisible character in the room observing. It had that kind of feeling to it. That's evolved since. And I think season 2, we started having a lot more of these silent montages where the music was carrying a lot more of the scene than it was season 1. We didn't have that many of these dialogue less montages. And so season 2, I was kind of forced to widen the palette a little bit and push for something slightly more cinematic and wider, and more atmospheric. So season 2 became a lot more atmospheric. I was running my piano through a lot of great vintage kind of space echoes and spring verbs and I really started it became a much wider experience sonically. And then season 3 is pushed even more into that space. And the other thing that happened in the evolution of the sound was the story of the show informed where the music went. So I started realizing pretty deep into season 1 that this show is really about this larger connectivity of life, this idea that your grandfather could have made a move that was seemingly benign at the time. It could have been a left turn at a light, that ended up having some sort of impact on you, and then on your offspring. It's these little actions that are seemingly small that actually have these really, really large effects over time. And so there was something karmic about it. And all of a sudden to me. And so then the score started taking on a little bit of my own kind of Indian sensibility and what I grew up listening to. And so the score is very Indian. A lot of people don't notice it, but it is super Indian. The melodies are very Indian in my vocal melody and the cellos and the pianos. I don't really change chords. I'm basically hanging on the 1 most of the time. It sits on the tonic. I literally very rarely am I actually changing harmonically. It's it all sits in this droney space.
But it's constantly intriguing because of what you have going on sonically, I think.
Yeah, what I have going on sonically. It's this, and it's also melodically. There's melodies that are pretty strong. I think that are weaving in and out of these scenes. And then it's also the arrangement. You can sit on the tonic for 5 minutes, but if you're doing a bunch of other cool stuff around it, sonically, melodically, and parts are coming in and out, and it feels like this elaborate jigsaw puzzle in a way, pieces coming together. It can be really interesting, and I've found a lot of fun in that. A lot of people would find it limiting that you're staying on the same chord for 5 minutes and you got to keep people interested, but I think it's effective. It also adds an interesting layer of tension, I think. to the show by nothing ever feels fully resolved in the score.
Do you ever receive your own music temped into a certain episode when you receive a cut?
Yeah, all the time. And it's kind of, it's interesting because I don't think I've never seen a cut of the show temped with music that was not my own from the show. And it's because I had a talk with one of the editors the other day, and even I was like, after season 3, I normally don't like hearing temp music. I just like seeing dry picture and then seeing what it inspires, because it's nice to have the kind of clean slate. But there are times where I like having the temp because it's also helping me think about the music differently. And I kind of always want to evolve and change the sound too a little bit within reason, you know. And sometimes, you know, I've worked on projects where like all the shows I work on, the editors are all really great. And so I've worked on shows where they brought in some temp music and it's inspired something that I never thought of before. I'm like, oh, maybe I should find a new instrument for this, or, you know. But on This Is Us, one of the editors told me recently that he tried to temp with, he's like, I actually tried to temp with something different. And he's like, it just changed the show too much. It was just too weird, you know. No matter how good the score was from whatever they were pulling from. I mean, it could have been a piece of Alexander Desplat's score, and it wasn't right, you know. And you know, he's my favorite composer on the planet. So yeah, we temp with my own score really most of the time, or we don't temp at all and just let me kind of do my thing.
So I am curious about like your individual approach of scoring a scene. So when you first like receive a cut of a show, do you start out with the guitar since it's mainly centered around that instrument? Do you start out with creating a sort of like pad environment, or you specifically, is it different each scene or each episode, or how does it vary in terms of starting a scene?
Well, the guitar usually gives me like the melodic. It gives me like the melodic. Let me find. Hold on one second. Let me show you. You know, so like if I have my guitar, I have this this is my baby over the last 2 seasons. It's this Silvertone acoustic. It's like a 1960s Silvertone, and if you look at the back, it's like taped together. Literally, like I'm normally like we'll be watching a scene, and I'll just be, you know, just plugging along, you know, just like plucking along, you know, and I'll find a melody of da na 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 na, bum 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 bum. So I just like made that up just now, looking at like what's behind you, but like. Bum 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 bum. I should record that.
I feel like we're 100% going to be seeing that as like the closing cue of some episode in season 4 or something. That would be so cool.
So I'm going to write that. What should I call this? Why don't you come up with a name for the cue? Name it. Your name is a plaid shirt. I'll call it plaid.
Yeah, this is plaid.
No, how about we call it? Yeah, fine. We'll call it plaid. We'll call it plaid shirt. I like plaid shirt.
Wonderful.
Okay.
So you'll take that idea, you'll sort of input it into your computer, and then how do you know if you want to add some type of soundscape under it, whether you want to keep it solo guitar, whether you want to add in like a solo string melody? How do you usually decide what to do from that point?
I'll normally like come up with that. I will pick up the guitar to try to find the melody. It also depends on the kind of scene it is. If it's you know, Howard, one of our editors, calls it my pastoral score for the shows when I do stuff like that, where I'm like, when I'm just kind of like feeling that. And so if there's a very quiet moment that I think deserves the acoustic, then I will do that. And then I'll write that melody, and then maybe just put some atmospheric pads around it. But not too much. A lot of droney stuff. It's a lot of drone stuff that's happening around it. And then sometimes I'll just, sometimes then I like in our Vietnam story from this season, which has been a very, very like heavy story. I'm actually then, that is all pad driven. Like I am staying away from the acoustic guitar because the acoustic guitar is not getting even the weight that I need. So I've been using lots of interesting stuff. I've been using like this, like, I mean, I don't know if you can even see this. Hold on, let me see, because it's plugged in, but I've been using a lot of my, okay, you can see this. This is like an Indian, it's like an Indian tanpura box. So it's what sitar players have droning underneath them sometimes when they play. This is a digital version of it. so much of the Vietnam story has this just hanging out underneath it, and I'm running this through crazy effects too, and then I can still write a melody over this, like na 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 la la da 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 na 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 na. So, you get some of that, and that gives you a whole different sort of weight. And then an entire scene can be scored literally with that one instrument. And it is so powerful when you have that can cover like a slow motion Vietnam sequence, with no dialogue. Just that tone alone.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I'm curious from your perspective, do you ever watch the show with an audience? And from the times that you have watched the show with an audience, what do you sort of pick up on how they're reacting to the scenes with your music? And have you learned a lot from, if you have, watching the show with an audience and seeing how they react to it directly?
No, I think maybe the thing I have learned is my audience is the only audience I watch the show with is my wife. And so, but she's a great kind of judge too. Like, she'll look at me and be like, "You didn't really need to put music there," like stuff like that. Like, she's like, "It's like, do you really need to be like?" That'll happen sometimes, and that'll also be like, "Oh yeah, you're right. Did we really even need anything there?" No. So if anything, sitting with an audience kind of makes you just think about the spotting choices. It helps me, like, is someone already responding to a scene? Am I hurting or helping the scene by coming in right now? That's kind of what I learned from being with an audience. The audience. It's just my wife is the audience, Jim.
Yeah. I'd love to close off the interview just by asking you, if you had, obviously the industry has changed so much just over the past 20 or so years with the sort of evolution of technology, the amount of opportunities that are sort of coming up not only from network television, but also, films, independent films. You have movies on Netflix series, so many different outlets for music to be written. And as all these opportunities arise, so do the amount of people that are wanting to become media composers. What would be your one piece of advice for the people wanting to pursue media composition?
I mean, I think you have to find, in any art form, you have to find your voice, and I think that's important. There's, in working in visual media, there's a lot of composers that believe that you have to kind of conform to whatever the directors, and this is maybe a controversial thing to say, but you have to conform to whatever the director wants and the producers want. You give them exactly what they want. I agree to that. I agree with that to a certain extent. Like, I think sometimes they don't know what they want either. And sometimes you have to also present something that blows them away, and I think so there's a balance. You have to satisfy the needs of the director and producer to give them like the thing that they dream about the show or movie being, right? But you have to also find your own voice and inject that into the project. I mean, on This Is Us, this is like, that's stuff I've been playing for you. It's very much in my soul, too. And I think, because I think that when you find your own voice and you display it in whatever the art form is, there's a certain authenticity that's achieved. It's an intangible thing, is authenticity. It's like, you can't quantify it. It's hard to you feel authenticity more than watch something like that is authentic. You feel it as someone who's absorbing the art. So I think that's really my advice, is find your voice. And then the way you find your voice is that you write. You just don't stop writing. Even if you don't have a project, even if you don't have a job, you could not have a job for 10 years. But if you are writing, that'll inform. That's something you can control. Is what you put out in the world. And so I think, don't stop writing.
Wonderful piece of advice. Siddhartha Khosla, thank you so much for taking the time. And congratulations on the show, everything that's going on with it. And I cannot wait for the future, not only of your music, but of the show in general. So great job.
Well, thanks so much, and nice meeting you.